Hello, everyone. One of the themes that my book, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, deals with is the theme of truth and what does it mean for something to be true. The book, in some ways, critiques postmodernism, but it also critiques rigid absolutism and fundamentalism at the same time. So it's a very nuanced book in that way. And those themes, I think, run all throughout the book. I think what the best books of fiction do is that they deal with things that are very much relevant in our world, but they mask it by setting a story in the past, by dealing with something in the past, just as Arthur Miller dealt with McCarthyism by setting the Crucible during the Salem witch trials, and you can find other examples of that as well. Whereas what I tried to comment on modern themes, but using the past, the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, to do so. And of course, now I'm going to have to talk about several storylines and how they relate to one another in order to get my point across, because in The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, you have characters who are working in factories. They feel alienated from their work. They feel like life has no meaning. They just get up in the morning so they can work. But the reason why they wonder why even go on living, because they want to live, but why live if your life is essentially a living hell? And because in some ways the workers in The Ecstasy and the Ignominy are like slaves. They are wage slaves. The idea that essentially is that you are a slave if you have to work in order to survive against your own will, so to speak. You're basically renting yourself in order to survive. And the characters in the story feel oppressed, but they don't always know exactly how to articulate it. But because of that, they fall prey to the philosophy of Bertrand Shaw, who insists that the remedy to that is essentially to eliminate private property altogether and to take control of society, where the workers can have control democratically. But of course, that philosophy spins out of control. Not that some of the goals were not noble; they were noble. The problem, though, was that the philosophy of Bertrand Shaw did not recognize the inherent dignity of the individual. It did not recognize that life is far more complex and far more nuanced than oppressor versus oppressed, and therefore you cannot dehumanize your enemy. Like in any philosophy where your enemy is dehumanized, where you hate your enemy, is not a sound philosophy, in my estimation. And so that is one of the major themes of the ecstasy and the ignominy, that truth exists in the objective sense, that it's not just about who has the most power, which is a philosophy that is often expressed in postmodernism. Although, of course, I know there are multiple different versions of postmodernism. But how this is dealt with is that you have a love story in The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, between the character of Catherine Harris and Edward Compton, who Catherine being the wife of one of the wealthy industrialists in the town, and Edward Compton, who is a worker in one of these factories. And of course, Catherine, being a very religious, very pious woman, doesn't want to give in to her passion, even though she's not really receiving any love from her husband. And so she feels guilty, obviously, because she's torn between her mind and her heart. And I think we've all had to deal. It's a very human book, because I think we have all had to deal with that at times, where we're torn between our mind and our heart, where our heart and our passion might say one thing, but logically we might know that that is not the right thing to do. So the book, in some ways, explores love and how it can be destructive. but also compassionate at the same time in the right context, because there is two kinds of love in this. There is destructive love, but ultimately what occurs is that, I don't want to give anything away, but it gets to a point in the story where love ultimately has to redeem the people in the town, because they've sinned, they've gone through so much, but how can they possibly be redeemed after so much death? And and love is old, and so the kind of love that is redemptive obviously is sacrificial love. It's the opposite of a selfish kind of love where you're pursuing your own desires. And it is sacrificial love is what is ultimately redeeming. And I think that I will read to you a passage from the book that I think expresses that philosophy quite well, where she says, where the character of Catherine says, "Out of love, the sun surrenders its light so the moon can live, dying to itself in the hope that the night might find redemption. To know love is to become one with God, shining brighter than any natural wonder could possibly conceive." And so you have the character of Catherine, who is able to finally gain a perspective, and is able to turn a love that was a selfish sort of love into a sacrificial love, and therefore she transcends what she had been. And so one of the major themes of the story is that love is redemptive, in that it can ultimately overcome any kind of postmodernism when it is sacrificial, when it recognizes the humanity and the dignity of the individual. And so these are all themes that run throughout my book. So in that way, I think my book is an answer in some sense to the modern philosophy of relativism, of postmodernism. So I hope you enjoyed this little lecture.